Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the video in which we are looking at what are the different type of workflows we can have in UiPath Studio. In the previous video we have seen we can have sequences and flowchart, and we have also seen that what is the difference between a sequence and a flowchart and when to use what. In this video we are going to see what are state machines and when to use state machines. Next we are going to see how does a state machine differentiate from a flowchart. After that, we are going to analyze what are the benefits of using a state machine in UiPath Studio. And we are going to see what are the terminologies that we should be aware of whenever we are dealing with state machines. So whenever we are dealing with state machines, we have different blocks in a state. For example, we have entry, exit, we have a transition, then we have something called trigger. Inside the trigger also we have action, we have a condition, and we are going to analyze that what is the execution order when we have data in the state machines, and all of this we are going to see with the help of a demonstration. Before directly jumping into the state machines definition and all the steps, let's see what exactly is a state machine with the help of an example. So we all have seen the traffic lights, right? So it turns from green, then red to yellow, and then again it switches back the state. So a traffic machine, a traffic signal is nothing but a state. So if you'll see the 1, 2 and the 3, these are the three states of a traffic signal. So whenever there is a transition happens, so the transition can be a time based transition or it can be based on the sensing car. So for example, if someday the number of cars are more in the road, so the red might be appearing for more time. If there are no cars, then it should be green, right? So the 1, 2 and 3 are the different states of a traffic signal. And how the transitions are happening, the transitions are happening based on the time. So you might have a system which changes the signal every 5 minutes or every 2 minutes, and then you might have a system which senses the car on the road and then it switches the transition. So the idea of the state machine is that whenever something changes from one state to different state, it always depends that what state you are on, right? So you will either be on the red or you would be on the green. Sometime you might be on the green and yellow, which says that you look and then go, and then it might be sometimes red, other times green, and other times yellow. So these are the three states of a traffic signal, and the transition are the time or the sensing based. Now one more example. In the first example we have seen the transition, right? So the transitions can be time based or the sensing car. Now to describe more about on the state, so we all have seen a vending machine. So vending machine, how does a vending machine works, right? So we look at the product, we put some of the money in the box, and then in the sum of the vending machine it says that okay, you have to put only this currency. So how does the state work? We insert the money, right? Then it scans the money, then it asks us to select the item, we select the item, then it vents the item we selected, and if I insert, let's say $10, it and the item was $5, it returned me the $5, right? So these are the state of a vending machine. So once the at a time you can be at only one set, so it won't be like that you can directly jump to the vent before inserting the money, right? So it happens one by one. Once the money is inserted, then only you will be allowed to select item. Once the item is selected, then only the machine will return you the money, sorry, then only the machine will vend you the item, and after that only you will get return money, right? It cannot be like you just insert the money and then you don't get the item and you just directly return the change, right? So that won't work. So that is a perfect example of a state, and the traffic signal is a very good example of the transition. So now I hope you understand that these two terms, that what are states and what is a transition. So in the traffic signal, as I just said, transition can be a time based or it can be a sensing based. So how this concept actually applies on the UiPath, that we are going to see today. Now, if I just go by the definition, so state machine is a type of workflow. So we have seen in the previous video that what exactly is a sequence and what exactly is a flow chart. So this is the third type of workflow which is provided by UiPath. It provides us a modeling style in which we can model our workflow in an event driven manner. So when we say event, it can be anything. For example, when we start with the UiPath. So the first stage is the start. We read the configuration file. When the configuration file is read successfully, then only we go to process the data. That is something and change of the event, right? So in our previous example, the event was a traffic or the event was a time. Next, what other benefit is that it uses a finite number of states in its execution, right? So that means we cannot have an indefinite number of states. We always have a finite number of states, let's say 10, 20, 15. We can go from one state to another when it is triggered by an activity, right? So we are in the red signal, right? So we cannot, it will not automatically go to the green without changing an event. So the event was the time, right? So in case of the vending machine, the event was automatically pre-configured, like whenever you get the money, you see the item is available, then only you vend, right? So that is the benefit of state machine. There are finite number of states and the state is triggered whenever there is an activity triggered in the previous one, right? So if you'll just read this one, uses a finite number of states in the execution. It can go from one state when it is triggered by an activity, and it exits that state when another activity is triggered. So that is how it works, states, and then we have something called transition. Now as we are saying transition, what is transition? It enables us to add condition based on which to jump from one state to another, and it is either represented by arrows or branches between the state, right? So transition is as simple as that. We can add conditions and the condition would tell us on which condition when the robot or the process will switch the state. So that is we call transition. Now we have all seen flowcharts, right? So now the question arises, okay, so we totally understand how a sequence is different from a flowchart. If you don't really understand the difference between a sequence and a flowchart, you can just watch the video. I'll put the link in the description and you can refer that. Okay, so now assuming you have seen the flowchart, right? So now the question arises, when we already have a flowchart, why do we exactly require state machine in UiPath or any process or any automation? Right, so the first thing is state machines are suited for complex transition. We can have n transition state, for example RE framework. Okay, so when you are dealing with a complex process, so the big automation, so we cannot have everything in an if else loop, right? So in the if, we have to specify a condition and that condition will be either true or either false, right? So for example RE framework, we'll just go on the RE framework and look how exactly the transition look like. Let us just first complete the differences. Next, the flowchart does not support transition. We can wait for an specific action. So what does it mean? So in flowchart you cannot have transition, right? In flowchart I cannot tell the process to wait for this item to continue. So let's say if I am in an automation, I'm doing an automation and I want to have a condition where I want to wait for something to happen, right? So we can either do the element exist or that is a separate part. But what happens in the flowchart where we have only if condition, right, and the branching, so I cannot hold the automation for that point. Either it will check whether the condition will be true or the condition will be false, right? I cannot hold the flowchart to wait for something to happen and then you execute, right? So that is the difference which state machine brings in picture. Flowchart uses the concept of branching. So whenever we say branching, it is if else. If something is happening, you go by this route. If that is not happening, you go by this route. State machines are suited for a continuous running process. For example, if I just give you an example of the vending machine, so once the money is inserted, then only check for the item. When the item is available, then only vend the item. If once the item is vend, check whether the money has to be returned. If the money has to be returned, return and then stop. Now if the same process cannot be done with a flowchart, if it has to be done with the flowchart, then we have to deal multiple ifs, right? If the money is available, then check for the currency, then again else, then we might create a big structure of flowchart or a big kind of tree which is difficult to read and difficult to maintain. So that's why we use the, for the continuous running process, we always prefer the state machine. And flowchart on the other hand uses the concept of branching, where the condition is true, you go by this branch. For example, if the age is less than 18, you are eligible to vote. If the age is less than 18 or greater than 18, you are not eligible to vote. something of those lines where the concept of branching is available, we go by flowchart. And when we have a continuous running process which is a complex process, then we go by the state machines. Okay, now let us see what are the benefits we get by using the state machines. The first one, it is flexible, that we can easily add and remove the states. Next, we have a separate business logic of the implementation. I can have let's say 5 different states in automation, in which only the state 4 is related to the business logic, and all the different states are related to the system or to the automation, and nothing has to do with the business. So we can definitely separate the business logic of the implementation. We can have multiple transition for the state. I can have one state going to, you know, 2 or 3 different state. So that also is a classical example of RE framework. I'll just show it in a while. Then we can have self transition of the state. So what does it mean? So I can have a state which is again transitioning to the self. So for example, I am in state 1. Because of some automation need, I always want to come back to that state. So that is also possible in case of in case of the state machine. We can have self transition, right? Next, we can have n number of final state. It is not like that whenever I say that this is the one process, you can have only one final state. So whenever we are using a state machine, I can have n number of final state. So for example, final state can be yes, you are eligible to vote. That is one final state. No, you are not eligible to vote. That is other final state. Okay, so before jumping to the terminologies, let's quickly have a look at the RE framework. Okay, so I am in the UiPath Studio, and this is how the robotics enterprise framework will look. So if I just click on this one, so if I go to the properties, you will see this is a state machine, right? And what are the components of the state machine? So whenever we create a state machine, we are presented with a start node. So all these things, the initialization and process, get transaction and the process transaction, these are all nothing but the states. Okay, this is nothing called a state, right? So if we'll see on a high level, the process starts, then it goes to the initialization. Whenever the initialization is successful, it go ahead and go to the transaction data, right? And once the initialization is not successful, that means we have a system exception, it goes to the end process. That means from a state I can go to multiple state, right? And we don't have any end state here, right? And sometime what would happen is, if I want to just get the transaction data and there is no data, I want to go here, what I can do is I can go and drag this arrow here, right? So now it becomes a self transition. So that is also possible in a state machine. So that is what I was talking about, the benefits. So these are nothing but the states, and these arrows designates the transition. So if I'll just hover over it, it says, see, this is a transition. So let us just open one initialization. I'll collapse this. Okay, so we'll talk about the implementation of a state machine in a little while. So this is the entry point of a state machine, and these are the transition. So I hope now you understand the state and the transition. So it says that whenever this entire block of initialization is successful, you go to this state. Whenever there is a system exception, you go to the end process. So here we have specified a state which is having two transition, and the two transition are going to different states. So that is how the state machine works. Okay, so now if I go back to my slide, these are some of the terminologies which will come occur whenever we are working with state machine. So the terminologies are state, entry action, exit action, trigger, condition, self transition, initial state, and the final state. So this is a brief description about all the terms which you will hear whenever we are using the state machine. So for example, an entry action, so this is the activity. So whatever activities we put in this action will be executed whenever we enter and state. Exit action, all the activities which are included in this section will be executed whenever the state is exiting. So these are all the terms which we will face. So you can have a read about those by pausing this video. Moving ahead, when we talk about the state machine in UiPath, so whenever we drag and drop an state, so if I just go back to the UiPath Studio, so first thing is how do we create a state machine. So the like we did for the sequence in the flowchart, we have a third option available which is called a state machine. So I can go here and I can select the state machine. Next it will ask me the name, so I will just na name it to state machine name. You can give it any name by your preference, and this is what we are presented with. Whenever I create a new state machine, so I am presented with a start node, and if I go to the properties, it has only one properties which says the state machine name. We can change it here, and the next is we have to add the states. So if I go to the activities, I type here state machines, state machine. Okay, so these are the set of activities which are available under the workflow and the state machine we have already available. Then we have two things which I call the this is the state and this is the final state. Okay, so if I drag and drop a state here, and if I just double click to open this one, so this is the view which is presented. So whenever we have a state, we have something called an entry section, we have an exit section, and then we have something called transition. And what happens when we drag and drop a final state like this? So a final state will have only one section, that is the entry, because this is the final and we don't want the process to execute beyond this. So it has only one section which is called the entry state, right? So whenever we are working with a state machine, so this becomes the very critical to understand that which part will execute, right? So to demonstrate that, if I again go back to my slide, so this is a state example. Now we would be wondering which and how exactly the state machine works. So let's see the execution order. First, whenever the state or the state is triggered, this is the first thing which will execute. So if you put some of the activities in the entry section, these are the set of activities which are going to execute first. Okay, next all the transitions will be evaluated. So the state machine will check whatever transition they are available, they will be evaluated, and only when the transition is going somewhere, means the transition state is there and the condition is true, then all this states transition thing will be executed. And once the transition is confirmed, then only the process will move to the next step, and while moving, while executing, means while getting out of the state, then the exit one will be performed. So the activities available in the exit block will be executed only when the transition is confirmed and the state machine is means exiting the flow. Okay, now we have seen we have one more activity, that was the final state. So in case of final state, so this would be, we have only one section, so whenever we are entering the final state, this is the first thing, so that definitely is going to execute. Okay, now let's see the execution of the state machine with a practical example, and let's see how exactly this execution order works in UiPath Studio. Okay, so I am in UiPath Studio. I go to new, I create a state machine, I rename the state machine to, let's say, sample example of state machines. Hit create, and we are presented a start node and a state machine, right? So the first thing is, here we wanted to look after the transition and how exactly the transition across the states happen in a state machine, and what is the execution order. For that, I'll go to activities, I'll type here state machines, and I will drag and drop a state. Okay, after that what I will do is I will drag and drop one final state, and let us drag and drop one more final state here. Okay, and I'll connect this one to here and this one to here. Okay, so we have seen in the slide that we can have more than one final state. Okay, and now whenever we connect the state machine, so we have something called T1 and T2. So these are nothing but the transition. So if I'll just open the transition, so a transition has also two parts and a condition. So the first one is the trigger, next is the action, and then the destination. Okay, so if I just open a sample one, so if I just go back, so if I'll just double click the T1, you will see this is the condition which is going to execute, and if the condition is true, then the action in the condition will execute, and when the condition is met, then the destination, the final state, will be executed. So if we'll just look at this picture, what this says, we will go start, then it will go to the transition, it will go to the first state. I will just let us put it to like init state. It will go to the init state, and then it will see whether the t1 is true or the t2 is true, and based on it will decide to the final state. But now if you will see, apart from the entry and exit of the state, we have something called action and condition and trigger of a transition. So when which activity we should put it where, right, and what is the execution order. So for it, let us try to do one thing. Okay, I'll go here and I will create a variable called, let's say, sample. Okay, so I am creating a boolean variable, I will call it boolware, and I will just change the type to the boolean, and I'll just specify the default value as false. Since it is boolean, the default is false anyways, but we are going to change it in a later part of the automation. Okay, where exactly? Okay, and let me just change the scope to the entire state machine, and okay, this is the init. And now in the t1, I want to type here, if this variable is equal to false, okay, you execute this block, and in here I am going to specify, if the variable is true, you execute this block. Okay, so I am in the state machine. Now let's see the execution order. To see the execution order, what I will do is I will drag and drop activity called write line. Okay, I will type here, this is the entry. Okay, this is the entry for init, and I will just print the timestamp. I will do it like this, now dot toString. Okay, so what we are doing is, whenever the state machine enters here, we want it to print that this is the log. So by by analyzing the logs, we will see what exactly is the execution order. So timestamp, it will execute very quickly. So what I will do is I will put a delay of 2 seconds after each activity. What this will do is, whenever, if I'm not putting the delay, the entire automation will happen very quickly within a snap, and we will not be able to analyze what happened where, right? So I have created an entry in the init. Okay, let me just go here, and when this block execute, what I want to print a statement which says that I am the exit of the init. Okay, this is done. I'll copy this one, I'll go to the transition t1. In the t1, this is optional. Okay, so we can leave it to blank. I'll go here, I will put here as, this is the action for the transition t1. Okay, collapse this, and in the final state, I'll again paste it here, and this is the final state. Okay, I'll go here and I will type final for t1, save. Let's go back, do the same thing for the t2. Trigger is optional, we'll see how exactly a trigger works in a later while. I'll put it here. So this guy is action for t2, save. Let's go back again in the final state, and this guy, this block, is a final state for t2, final, final state for t2. This completes the implementation for the final state t2. Let's go back to the state machine and revisit what we are trying to accomplish here. We have a state machine called the sample example state machine that comprises of start node, and then we have a state which is called the init state. We have entry, exit, and two transition. The transitions are called t1 and t2, and those t1 and t2 are directing to the final state t1 and the final state t2. So objective here is, we want to analyze the execution order in a state machine. So for that, what we have done is, in each and every block of the state machine, we have put a sequence which comprises the name of the block and a delay of 2 seconds, just to see how much time, just to see the exact timestamp. Okay, so if I go again here, I will go back to the state machine and we'll try to execute this one. I'll go here and run the file. Okay, let's wait for the bot to execute. So the bot is executing, you can see it in the bottom. Now with the help of the output console, we'll see which activity executed at what time. Okay, so let's go to the output. So it started. Okay, the entry for the init was executed, then the exit, and then the action of the T1 was executed. Okay, so why action of T1? So if we just, let's see what was the first action. Entry of init. Okay, so if I open, so first thing was entry of init. Okay, this was executed. After this, the transaction for was confirmed. Okay, so where exactly the state machine has to go. And if you remember, in the T1 and T2, what we have done in this transition, the condition was bool variable. If false, then we go to the T1 and we have set the variable to false, hence the transition was confirmed. So what happened next? Entry was executed, the transition was confirmed to T1. Okay, so while exiting this one, this init state, it went and it executed the exit of init, and the exit of init was printed with a 2-second difference. That was executed. Now it went to the action of T1, and if you go to the T1, this was the transition. Here what we have done, this was the condition which was validated, and the condition was false because the variable was set to false. Then it executed the action for T1. So in the print action for T1, and once this was finally executed, the destination was final state T1. It went there and it printed the final T1. Okay, so this is the final T1. So that is how this sequence work. It initialized, it first went and printed the entry, then it confirmed the transition, that was T1. So if you'll see, the T1 was not printed. It, after the entry, it has printed the exit one, because once the transition is confirmed, once this exit block is executed only when the transition is confirmed and the process is exiting the flow, right? So while exiting, it printed the exit, right? Then the action of the T1 happened and the final of T1. Now let us go and make some changes, and I'll go here and set this guy to true. Hit save. I'll go here and let's try to run the file. So now this time, instead of T1, what should happen is the transition T2 should occur, and everything, whatever the steps we have recorded for the second transition should execute. Let's go to the output. So entry for initialization, entry for exit for initialization, then the action of T2 was executed, and then final state of T2 was executed. Okay, so because this is the final state of T2, this was executed. Okay, so now I hope you understand how exactly we should use the state machine. So now let us do one thing. What happens if there are no more transitions? Okay, so let's say if I go here and this transition, I will just set this variable, the variable value is true. Okay, and I will change both the condition. Okay, so for both the condition, I will change it to false. This is also false. Okay, so T2 is also false and T1 is also false, and the value for the variable is true. Now what should happen? Okay, now it will start, it will go to the init state, and then neither of the transaction is is true, neither this one nor this one, both are set to false. Let's try and run the file. So we have given a delay of 2 seconds, so the bot is executing. Okay, let us wait for the execution. If we go back to the UiPath Studio, go to the output, and you will see it is still at the entry. So it has been more than 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, it will always remain here. Why? Because the transition is not confirmed, and if you will see, the exit also is not printed. That means state machine will be in this state till the transition is confirmed. Okay, so none of the transition is being confirmed, that's why the state machine is stuck here. It is not going to come out of the state till the time it gets a transition to the some other state. Okay, so I hope now you understand the concept of the transition and the states. Okay, so this will remain here forever because it is not getting any of the other state or any of the other transition. That's why, and that's why you will see the exit is also not getting printed. I'll stop this. Okay, and now if I again go here and if I change this to true, now it will match and it will run the file. Okay, let's see now. We have again reverted to the true. Now one branch is set to true, so now the state machine will get its transition, and after 2 seconds in the init it will now come to the T1 part. Okay, I hope now you understand the concept of state machines, transition, final state, and how do you implement the states. Okay, so you can also build a similar workflow at your end and try to see how it exactly this thing works. One more thing, if we'll just go to the browser, and if you want to have a real-time example, you can always go to browser, type StateMachines UiPath. I'll go to the official documentation, and there you will find one example which is provided by UiPath. I scroll down to the this one, and see, this is an example which is already provided by UiPath, that is just guessing an number what we have put. And I go here, download the example. Once the download is completed, we can always unzip it and try to analyze the flow of the state machine. So this is an example which is provided in the docs.uipath.com. It is available here in the state machine example. Okay, let's see what this is. Okay, so this is how the example looks like. So in this workflow, but in this example provided by the UiPath for the state machine, what they are trying to do is they are trying to give the random guess the number. Okay, so if I go ahead and run the file, so it will ask me to give me a number. Okay, so it says add a number between 1 and 100. So let's say I give 88. 88, hit OK. Your guess was too small, try a bigger number. So number 88, then let's 90. Okay, is too small. Okay, then 95. Okay, is too big. 94. Congratulations, you guessed the number correctly. The number was 94. Okay, so it's just a random guessing number game which is built on a state machine. But if we'll analyze how it is built, so we have state, then this is also a state in this entry section. So this is the first thing which is execute. So what happens in the entry section, it gets a random number between 1 and 100, and that is assigned to a random number. There is no activity. Once the number is initialized, it is going to a transition. So if I open the transition T1, there is no condition, but it's only have a destination that it goes to a guess number. So here it has only one transition T1, and there is nothing a condition here. In our case we have a condition, a bool variable, but here we don't have a condition. That's why it goes to the guess number. In the guess number, what we do is every time we ask the user to guess the number. Okay, and based on these transition now, so guess number, try bigger, try smaller, so these are the transition where the condition is written. So if the initial guess, the number which we have guessed is equal to the random number, then this is a correct, then we go to the final state. So what is the definition for the correct state? The initial guess is equal to the random number, you directly go to the final state, and in the final state we just print the congratulations. But what happens when the number was bigger or smaller, right? So if it is, we say try bigger, how do we know that the number is bigger? We just compare. If the guess is less than the random number, we just print this number, a message, and we again go. So this is an example of self transition where the state machine is getting transition to again to itself, right? And if the similarly for a smaller one, try smaller, this is the condition, this is the message we get, and then we again go to the guess number, right? So, and this is how, this is an example. You can always go to docs.uipath.com and download it from here. So that is all for this video. I'll wrap this video here. Let's have a quick recap. In this video we have seen what are state machines, what is the difference between a state machine and a flowchart. Then we analyzed what are the benefits that we get using the state machine. Then we see what are the terminologies. We have seen with an example that how the execution order in a state machine occurs. We have seen also an example that we have downloaded from the docs.uipath.com, and we have seen how that state machine was prepared. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe to the channel, and happy automation.